Welcome back. Now, let's move on to the next story. The United States has announced its withdrawal of 66 international organizations, including 31 United Nations agencies, citing national interest. President Trump's directive ends American funding for bodies deemed contrary to U.S. priorities, deepening Washington's retreat from multilateralism and raising concern among allies. Well, we are definitely witnessing a seismic shift in global diplomacy, and joining us to dissect the fallout is Bolu Michael-Biyi, foreign policy analyst in Eswatini. Bolu, thank you so much for joining us at this time. Now, when you look at the list, what do you think? Is this really about saving money for the taxpayer, or is it a deliberate attempt to destroy the way the world has worked since for decades?
I think it serves a broader agenda. President Trump believes that, funding these organizations, they kind of promote certain populist agenda, or that he doesn't really align with. The American first ideology is all about is not really in support of multilateralism. And I think the money argument is more or less a smoke screen, if I can put it that way, because the U.S. contribution to these 6 organizations is just a combined fraction of their budget, because defense alone is about $850 billion plus, but the joint contribution to these organizations is between 10 to 15 billion. So it's just a drop in the ocean for the United States, really. It only makes sense if these billions of dollars, it's going to be channeled into, say, social welfare programs. That's understandable. That's what, expand child welfare, issues that relate to women within the country and things like that. So what would justify such action, in my opinion, would be what this money is going to be used for. It's not just about just saving the money and just keeping it in the bank. What is this $10 billion to $15 billion going to be used for? That's what I feel. That's what I think would justify, the funding or the withdrawal from this international organization, in my opinion.
All right, let's pick a few of those international organizations. The withdrawal from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to begin with, and also the IPCC, essentially removes the world's largest historical polluter from the table. So, but does this leave the world's poorest nations to sink or swim on their own?
Okay, yes, it's correct that the United States has historically been the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. I mean, that's how they were among the first to get industrialized, because they burnt a lot of coals, and they did that for over 150 years. And that's how they got industrialized. But, the countries, especially those in Africa, developing countries, especially the small island nations, they seem to be the one to be suffering from this. So the United States pulling up from this framework is more or less literally saying that, okay, we caused this problem, but we're not going to fix it. We're not going to be accountable for it, which is not, I think, is not a good situation. They have done their research. They have their own reasons for pulling out from the framework. Maybe they believe the money going to these African nations or smaller nations or vulnerable nations, let me put it, holistically, is being used by the, national leaders for something else. It's not going to compensation and prevention of climate change. But we can really feel the effect in Africa. Even when we look at Nigeria, this season, usually years ago, it used to be Harmattan and all, but we could see rainfall in December, which is really weird, to be honest, so which means that climate change is real, and we can all see it from the heat waves, the rising seas, to the drought. Climate change is real, but President Trump feels otherwise. That climate, he's said it several times during his speeches, that climate change is a hoax. I don't think it's a hoax, and I feel that it might be a mistake to pull out from such framework.
Okay, so but what about, because we know among the targets are UN Women and the UN Population Fund, and these are agencies critical for maternal health and gender equality in over 150 countries, by the way. The White House claims that these bodies promote social engineering. So does this mean more women in vulnerable or war-torn countries will die during childbirth?
If it's totally dependent, if this organization totally dependent on the United States, maybe that would have been the case. but I believe that there are other organizations that are contributing to these organizations. I feel all they need to do basically is to up their support. If they're contributing $10 billion before, they can make it 20, just to ensure that they are filling the gap that the United States will be leaving. If these organizations were to be the solution to maternal mortality and the rest of that, then they will cease to exist now, and they would, we won't still find cases of maternal mortality and children suffering. So I don't think it's like an absolute solution to the problem. They only kind of reduce, the chances or the propensity that, this maternal mortality would occur. They only kind of just reduce it a bit, but if the US is pulling out, then I feel other organizations need to step up and fill that gap. But to clearly say that because the US is not now in the picture, that we see women dying and children suffering, that may not be the absolute truth.
Okay. Well, I really wish we could touch on more of these, but then, Bolu, thank you so much for joining us and speaking on this. We'll definitely make our time to discuss more on this issue.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.